All right, I am now joined by a very, very, very special guest. It is former MLB pitcher and current director of amateur scouting and player development at Gaeta Sports Management, Spenser Watkins. Spencer, I've been looking forward to this one. We have a ton of mutual friends, by the way, so this is fun. So, first, how are you?
Great, man. I appreciate you taking the time to have me on here. And like we were already talking here in the beginning, we've got a lot of connections and excited to dive in here.
Yeah, so Ryan Ripken and I are good friends. I know you guys played together. Mason McCoy, I think you guys also had a run there in the O system. So,
Hmm.
yeah, when I saw that like we had so many like mutual connections, I thought this would be a fun just way to talk about some Orioles, talk about some of your career and some of your current stuff. So, yeah, thanks for taking some time.
Absolutely, brother. Excited about it.
So I want to start at the beginning because I was reading that you started playing baseball at a very young age as a catcher at first and then an outfielder. But I feel like just like the trait of like always having a good arm was something that like you had the whole time. Was there ever thought about using that good arm as a pitcher, or was the allure of swinging a bat too much for you back then?
Yeah, actually, the way it all worked out is I pitched when I was younger. Everybody when you're playing youth baseball, everyone tries to pitch and figures it out. And like you said, I knew I had a good arm, so I pitched when I was younger. Hurt my arm when I was I think 12 years old, and was out for like a whole year, and just didn't want to go through that again. So I like vowed to never pitch again, and said that was it. I'm never going to do that. And then I always loved catching as well, so I could never hit. So it actually wasn't the glory of hitting that was keeping me there. It was more so just not wanting to hurt my arm again. Um, so that was kind of my focus. And then obviously, as I went through it, I realized that that arm was going to be my path to continue playing. So ended up switching it that way. But yeah, was a catcher, was an outfielder, and then like I said, I just could not hit to save my life. So figured let's give this one thing a go around again, and it ended up working out pretty well.
Did having like the catcher's mentality and the knowledge from that position, did that ever help you when you started pitching it initially?
Certainly, yeah, because you're someone who wasn't necessarily around the pitching side of the game for a majority of my youth after I hurt my arm. It still kept me in the idea of like, okay, what does it mean to attack a hitter? What is the strike zone? Like, what as a hitter are you looking for? What is a catcher's perspective do hitters struggle to handle well, or just getting a vibe for what the umpires like to see, or what the just overall that how that battery can work together. I still to this day think it gave me a great advantage going into the pitching side.
Even when initially I feel like I read somewhere that you only threw fastballs. Is that common back then, or it's like were you pretty like out there just only throwing fastballs?
Yeah, I mean, the difference of development, just what was that, 10, 15 years ago, 16 years ago to now. I mean, being on the agency side of things, you start scouting these younger players, and these guys know what their pitch shapes are because they can throw on TrackMan at the age of 12 years old. And granted, are they spinning it over 1,000 RPMs? Probably not, but they have an idea of what that is. When I was throwing, it's like I had no idea what spin shapes and all that stuff was. So in reality, development wise, it was like I can't throw that for a strike. The only thing I can kind of throw for a strike is a fastball. So I'm just going to rip that as many times as I can.
Yeah, there was a cool article I was reading about just like the early days of you in high school and college. I was reading that like your senior year, your coach tried to develop you enough to try to get you to play it like at the levels above, and like he had a very like trying to get you like to the next level. What did that look like for going from high school to college and everything back then?
Yeah, no, I was super lucky to have a handful of high school coaches who really cared about me as a human being as well as a player, and knew that my best baseball was ahead of me just because of my transition going from position player to pitching, and just being connected with the that high school program, living in that area for majority of my youth life. They got me a great opportunity and said, "Hey, let's just turn you into a pitcher. That you're gonna suck for a while, but we're going to build you up to where you can go on to the next level and continue to progress," because they saw something in me. But yeah, I ended up getting a connection from that coach at Glendale Community College, to go and throw a bullpen for the manager, Paul Hatcher, at the time. Went through a bullpen. He offered me a junior college scholarship on the spot, and was able to just come in freshman year, pitched a little bit out of the bullpen. I mean, I threw 3 innings my senior year of high school, and I hadn't pitched prior to that before I was, 12 years old. So it had been a while. So hopped in through, I think 30 something innings out of the bullpen my freshman year, and then switched over as a starter my sophomore year, and kind of just continued to progress each year.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, and I love talking to pitchers about this. Like, what's your relationship been like with velocity throughout your career? Did you ever chase it? Were you comfortable? Was that something you were like trying to figure that out at a period of your career? Like, how have you kind of approached the idea of velocity?
Yeah, it was always a love hate thing for me. I was never a guy who was gonna, blow your doors off with a heater. Like I was a spin specialist. I was gonna disrupt timing more so than just beat you with a heater. But yeah, definitely a love hate thing. Always searched for it. I think any pitcher, especially at the professional level, is always searching for an extra mile per hour or two, especially as my career went on, the more data collection and analysis and biomechanical analysis, all that stuff that started to come about, started to, get very interested in that and find different ways that I could, adjust a movement pattern or something like that to get it. But there were times in my career where I caught myself putting myself more in a hole than not, trying to hunt and search for more velo rather than more so just accepting my nature and allowing myself to mold myself through what I do well, which is spin the ball, disrupt timing, having a larger arsenal. So I would say, yeah, it's a love hate relationship. I love the times when I could figure it out and add a tick or two, but then I really also hated the times where I would be trying for months at a time and I almost felt like I would start throwing slower. So, any professional pitcher that's gone through it understands exactly what I'm talking about in terms of that love hate where like you try and try and all of a sudden you're like, I'm throwing slower than I was before. You're like, you go back to the drawing board. So love hate relationship. Wasn't my calling card, but always loved to get a little bit extra when I could.
Yeah, because I feel like when you were coming up, that was the age where like all pitchers like velocity was everything. Like any team that like that they were pitching got their whole pitching philosophy was just like throw the ball harder than everybody else. It was like an arms race. And like, did you ever feel pressure to like change who you were as a pitcher? Like you said, you're a spin guy. You never were a velo guy, but I have to imagine maybe even like the minor leagues trying to get noticed and get moved up. Like, did that ever creep in?
Yeah, especially being in the Detroit system years past before they brought in the new regime and everything, they were much more, old school Detroit was, big fastballs and power bats, right? Verlander, Price, all those guys. And then you got Ordonez, Cabrera. Like that was Detroit baseball at that time. So me being a guy coming in throwing 90, 92, a 94 was like a big deal for me. Yeah, it was definitely, I definitely felt like I was working uphill most of my career with them, but you know ultimately I found myself getting the ability to progress enough each year to where I could gain, maybe come in one year throwing 91, the next year 92, 93. It's enough to kind of keep the wolves at bay, and which allowed me to maximize what I do well and continue to learn new pitches, continue to do really well with spin, directed pitches and things like that. So, yeah, it worked out pretty well for me. I didn't feel like I had too many requests to change things.
Interested. Have you ever gotten gun shy from like in a game from like away from using your fastball? Like if you're ever in a game situation and like every time you're throwing the heater, it's giving up hard contact. Does that ever like how do you go off of that as a pitcher when like you need the fastball to kind of set up other stuff?
Oh yeah, absolutely, dude. I mean, especially early on too, like, you have a little bit of ego death as a young player when your fastball is getting peppered off the wall, it's kind of oh shit moment. So I definitely, as I grew and matured in my career, I started to realize that I didn't have to have a fastball and I didn't have to blow everybody's doors away with a fastball. It was more so like I mentioned before, front to back. So just allowing the hitters to dictate what I was trying to do with that pitch and that count. So maybe I started to, notice I would always go in with the same game plan and then adjust from there. So if I noticed guys were starting to get on the heater, we'd start to throttle back and get them out in front. If I realized guys were, on time with the off speed, then we could throttle up with the heater. So, I mean, it was never, early on, yeah, there was a little bit of that ego death. And I was trying to push a fastball when I probably shouldn't. And it probably hurt me more so than not. But as I got older, I definitely matured and realized that it's a cat and mouse game and I could use it as much or as little as the situation called for.
Yeah, well, have you seen like the modern trend in baseball pitching now is like it's way less four seam fastball usage.
Mm-hmm.
It just like
Mm-hmm.
again it runs counter to like when I was growing up. It's like everybody was like mostly heater, and now
Yeah.
it's like you see like the sweepers and everybody wants a cutter and these different pitch shapes. Like, what do you think about the decline in usage of a four seam fastball? And do you think you were a little bit ahead of that curve? Because I think you threw like six different pitches a couple years ago when you were in the show. Like, did you feel
Mm-hmm.
like you were kind of out like ahead of the curve for that stuff?
Yeah, I would attribute me being somewhat ahead of the curve more so to the analytics team at the Orioles. They were a bit ahead of the curve with everybody on the analytics side. They were still behind the ball in terms of teams like the Rays, the Astros, and things like that, but they were still one of the pioneering teams in terms of really implementing data-driven decisions. So I would attribute that, but I mean, I understand in the days game about all the data collection, run value is what it drives everything, right? And the fastball, unfortunately, unless you throw 100 and it's got 26 inches of hop, your Felix Bautista, and even his fastball's run value isn't even all that great. But if unless you have that complete outlier fastball pitch, like the run value, these analytic driven teams, which is pretty much all 30 of them now, have an analytic system. They're going to push you to throw that pitch that has the greater run value that or run value against, right? That's going to give up the least amount of hard contact, least amount of hits, things like that. So when you go through in this day and age, you go through those pitchers meetings and you have those conversations with the analytic team, they're going to push more to take advantage of your best pitch per se. And that may be throwing your sweeper 70% of the time as a starter. Like it's just is what it is. It's the old adage of pitch off your fastball, like you mentioned, is kind of dead and gone. There's a couple of those guys that will do that, but those are the outlier heaters you find. But for the most part, it's all data driven, and I understand it. But I will say, me being ahead of the curve, I'll attribute that to the guys with the Orioles.
Great to hear. Yeah, as a nose guy. I had somebody on here a while ago that, because like you said, like your fastball it was like low to mid 90s, which I mean
Mm-hmm.
right now I don't know what the average is in baseball, but I'm assuming that's a couple ticks lower than what the average is. But like
Mm-hmm.
he was saying that actually might be a positive thing. There might be like a revolution of guys throwing softer again, just because it's so far under the hitting speed. Did you ever
Mm-hmm.
feel like that you could get away with throwing like a 90-91 heater and have it not like immediately get crushed?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of guys in this game that are so geared and so good at hitting high velo pitches. I mean, that's kind of the style of hitting that's uh, preached now. Like, look at a guy like Gunnar Henderson. Gunnar Henderson and Boba I think, are the perfect examples for the new style of hitting, where they're already loaded, they're already cocked back, and they're ready to just fire everything off and be ready for a 98-mile-an-hour heater, and they can get to it, and then they're strong enough and trust their eyes enough to make an adjustment. So I think, like you said, being under the hitting speed, and I've noticed it many times where I'll throw a heater to a guy who's maybe a really good high velo hitter down the middle, and he'll hit it off the end of the bat because he's out in front of it. And it's kind of a crazy concept because I'm like, damn, like that guy was just in front of my fastball, like my hardest pitch. But in reality, like that can be useful. Like it's the old terminology of throwing a BP fastball, right? If you've ever heard that, like
Yeah.
you don't really put it in your game plan to go up there and try and throw an 88-mile-an-hour fastball. But in reality, like 3-0, 3-1, like sometimes those guys are so geared up and are dead red that they're going to be out in front of it. So I could see it definitely playing. Like I said, am I going to put that in my game plan? Absolutely not. But but I could see it having a little bit of a place in the game somewhere, especially with the new style of hitting.
I'd like to see it make a comeback. Yeah, there are some guys. I think like Justin Steele, the Cubs, is like one of those like soft tossing guys. Like I remember when Ben Lively had like a really career year and the guy was pumping 90, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
I could see that coming back in style again. Because everything just comes back around. Like the stuff they used to wear, like the starter jackets in the 90s are cool again. So I think they're all going to be it's all going to come back around at some
It's a
point.
cat and mouse game every year. We went from throwing fastballs up to throwing sinkers down, and I think the fastball up is going to come back. Sweepers and now depthier curveballs are more in play. It's just going to go back and forth. It's just what it is. Pitchers get an advantage, hitters get an advantage, back and forth.
Does that pitching side, like as an ex player and like the agency side, is that something that like you like to nerd out on? Do you enjoy going in
Mm-hmm.
depth on like pitch shapes and analytics?
Yeah. So you mentioned the title earlier. The player development side of my title is pretty much that. So being able to offer our clients in-house essentially player development, and I'm not trying to redesign the wheel or anything, but maybe a guy, we had one of our amateur clients had an outing when I was there to watch it, and I had made some notes throughout. And so we had a phone call the next day, and we went through, my ideas of, maybe I wanted him to use his fastball in more and think more about throwing his changeup on the heart of the plate rather than pigeonholing himself to just being down and away, which gives him more risk, less reward, all that type of stuff. And having that ability to bring that my knowledge that I've gained over the 12 years in the pros, 3 years in the big leagues, like to now bring that in house to our clients, is a super valuable resource we think we offer at the agency. And then it's something fun for me to be able to still be involved with our guys, not only on a business side, but like I'm still kind of sitting with them in the dugout, essentially, like I did in my veteran years in my playing career, and just have these conversations, as someone who was in their shoes and can kind of give some insight from the years that I've experienced.
Yeah, no doubt. When you work with young guys and guys who've gotten drafted and players who are hoping to get drafted, when they're asking you about like your career, are they ever just like shocked there were 30 rounds of the MLB draft? Is that or does that just blow their mind now?
It's almost at a point where it like doesn't even register because it seems so just outrageous that there were that many selections. And I was 10 rounds before the final selection, which is crazier too. So we're almost at a point where they're like 30, like there's no way. Like that's not even, it doesn't even register to them. You know what I mean?
How did you kind of view being a 30th round draft pick at the time? Were you just like happy to get selected? Did you think you were going to get taken a little earlier? How did you take me back to that point?
Yeah, yeah, dude, I was just ecstatic to have a chance and have my name called. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. Back then you have scouts come through and they'd leave a player questionnaire for you to fill out, and now it's all digital, of course. But and so you'd have, there were probably 6 teams or so that were interested, and the Tigers were actually the only team that didn't reach out to me in terms of the group that I thought was going to pick me. And ultimately, the Tigers selected me. They're the only team that I never even spoke to of the group. So that was kind of funny. But yeah, being a 30th rounder, I didn't have any expectations to go day one, day two. But I just wanted an opportunity. It pretty much said, just give me a plane ticket and a jersey and like let me earn a spot somewhere. And, luckily got selected and got an opportunity and got my foot in the door and ran with it.
Did you have any eligibility left in college, or were you just like that? What you exhausted it all at Western Oregon?
I had exhausted it all. Obviously that's before too all this crate where you seem to now have like 7 years of eligibility. But no, I was a fourth year senior, so my eligibility was done after that season.
As just like a fan who didn't play like college sports at all, it just sometimes blows my mind that like in the draft process when teams know they're drafting a guy who doesn't have eligibility left, just like the leverage play that comes in. Like Steven Wilson, plays for the Rays now. Like, I think he was like, eighth or ninth round draft pick is because he had no more eligibility left. I think his bonus was like $5,000 or something. It was
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah,
that's how I don't. It just blows my mind. Like the leverage play.
sure.
That's like, well, do you want to play baseball or not?
Leverage is massive when it comes into that stuff. It kind of drives everything. I mean, as in negotiation tactics for anything in the world, leverage is everything, and so even more so for the draft. But like you said, yeah, I mean, and teams are smart. They'll take advantage of it. They'll say, hey, this guy is no leverage. We can sign him for little. We'll take him in those first couple rounds and save some in our budget or our bonus pool down the road to maybe bump somebody else's number who does have leverage down the road, get his numbers up so that they can sign him. So teams know what they're doing.
Did you get a bonus in the 30th round?
Yeah, it was $1,000, which was then taxed. So it was like $680.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What, what was it like in the early days financially in the low, like to mid minors with the Tigers? Like how did you kind
Oh,
of
dude,
navigate that?
that was tough, man. So I worked every off season. I made far more money working in the off seasons to allow me to at least like not go into full credit card debt every year. Um, but yeah, dude, I mean, before what was it? Before 20 or after, yeah, it had been after COVID, right? So all 7 years with the Tigers, I think I saw a W-2. We were going through our house buying process, and I pulled up some old W-2s, and I found a W-2 from 2016 with the Tigers, and I think I made $12,000 that year. Yeah,
Ew.
I'm pretty sure it was like 12K total over for a 6 month season. And that's what is that net? So that was before taxes. Um, yeah, dude, just crazy. And then on top of that, you had to pay for your own living. You had to find your own living unless you were had an area with a host family. So I mean, in reality, every single year I would come home and probably have a couple grand in credit card debt, and then I would work, you know, pretty much from the get go until I would leave to build up some savings to go to the season again. But that was pretty standard. And I was a bartender, I was a server, I worked for a beer distribution company, I was a valet, I was a youth coach. I've done it all, man.
Yeah, you're right, because that was before. I think that's a recent thing where minor league baseball was required to provide like housing, and I think also just like better food came with that too. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
in the old days, quote unquote, when you were playing in the minor leagues, like yeah, that's how what was the living situations like in some of these random small towns that you were playing minor league baseball in?
Dude, crazy. There was one year I was in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I lived in an attic. It was $500 a month. I lived in an attic. I had no furniture, no air conditioning, and no Wi-Fi. And it was, yeah, I don't even know. I might have a picture. Let me see if I can find it. I don't think I have it. I don't have it anymore. But and the only money I had, I could buy a $25 inflatable air mattress, like the single chamber, tiny little one. I bought a little $10 Target fan, and that was it. That was my room for the season there.
Did you learn a lot about like nutrition and like what you can like feed your body off of, because like now everything's so finely tuned, and it's like guys coming up now, they understand like what it takes to fuel your body correctly. But did it take you a while to figure out how to do that on a budget?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I was gonna say nutrition. Probably didn't learn the best nutrition, but definitely learned how to budget well and where
Yeah.
where to make the dollar stretch a little bit more for sure. But yeah, we get used to it. But the other side, the other thing that made it really tough as well is the old structure was, you'd be home for 3 days, then you'd be gone for 6 days. Then you're home for 6 days, you're gone for 3 days. Rather than nowadays, it's you're home for 6 days, you're gone for 6 days, home for 6 days, gone, right? Or then you'd be gone for 12 days and you'd be home for a month. So you couldn't necessarily go grocery shopping all that much because food would go bad because you'd be gone home, gone home. So that made it really tough as well. So you had to figure out a lot of, like, guys would bring coolers on the road and buy a loaf of bread and some deli meat, and guys would just make sandwiches in their room. Things like that. We figured out ways to stretch the dollar, or you'd stock up on whatever's provided at the field to take home. Things like that. You figured out ways here and there, but it was definitely a grind.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I feel like we forget about that period of time, given like how much things have changed in the last couple of years. But
Right? The
yeah,
old
that's
prehistoric days.
did you play with Tarik Skubal in the Tiger system?
Hmm. Yes, I did. So I was bouncing between Double A and Triple A, and he had just gotten called up to Double A, and his locker was actually right next to mine, and so that was when I first met him. And Tarek is a phenomenal dude. I mean, just a grade A pro. Like that guy, for how big of a name he has now and how big he's become, he is still the same human being. You could shoot him a text, you could shoot him a message, and he'll respond to you just like he would any other. Like, it's just he's the same guy. He doesn't allow what his success is to define him. His Who he is as a person defines him, and anybody close to him will answer that same exact way. Yeah, definitely got a chance to get to know him that way. He's an Arizona guy, so over COVID we actually linked up. The whole backyard bullpen thing. I don't know if you ever heard about that back in the day. I got Scoob to join us for that, and then that's when there was that whole situation going on during COVID, which was fun. But yeah, just a good dude. But yeah, we've been connected.
Even back in the minor leagues, like his numbers were like they jumped off the page. I think it was like 18 Ks per nine, maybe in
Hmm.
that Double A year that you guys played together.
Hmm.
What did you notice about even back then, early 20s Scooble, that like you knew was going to be really good?
It was special, dude. He would just you saw like there's the whole kind of idea of men amongst boys is when you'd watch him pitch and dominate hitters, you're like, that's a man pitching, and we're all just boys pitching, if that makes sense. Like, it just was different, dude. Like the sheer domination, the bad swings, the uncomfortable at bats, and then just I mean, it was like he would just stroll in like it was just another day at the yard, man. Like he was just as humble as can be, and is like, that's just Scoob. Scoob's gonna do Scoob, and it was like you could tell it was special from the get go.
I think that's what also is so cool about the MLB and in like the player development MLB draft side is like he wasn't like a first overall highly recruit. Like, would he come from Pacific? University.
Seattle U, dude. I had
Is
no idea
Seattle?
who he
Yeah.
was, even when they drafted him. Like he wasn't even the talk of the draft pick, the draft class. And that's what I'm saying. When he comes up to Double A, and I'm like, I never met this guy until now. And then all of a sudden, it's Tarik Skubal, and it's like, all right, guy's the real deal.
He's also just like added so much to like his repertoire over the years. Like I read, I think it was like fastball slider early on, but like now adding like the seam shifted wake on his changeup.
Mm-hmm.
How common is it for pitchers to like pick stuff up like that? Because I was reading like Kyle Harrison now with the Brewers, like he was talking to a former teammate in the offseason. And he's just like, I like this grip. And now his changeup is unhittable. Like how common is pitchers talking to other pitchers and picking stuff up like that?
Super common, and that's not just anything that's been driven by the data side of things too. You know, guys have more idea of what the pitch shape and the seam shift wake and what the orientation is doing. That's been common from the get go as long as baseball has been around. But yeah, dude, guys talk all the time. Pitchers, I mean, if you watch a game and they'll pan over to the dugout, you'll see pitchers sitting together, and a guy will be holding the ball, and they'll be talking about seam orientations and all that type of stuff. And you're constantly just the best pros and the guys that play this game for a long time are the ones who are constantly learning. These guys never have it all figured out themselves. Anybody can give a piece of knowledge and piece of information that can help you as a player. And those guys, the ones that continue to evolve, like a Tarik Skubal, are the guys that'll take in any bit of information from anybody and see if it applies to them and helps them in any way. And that's something that I've tried to do in my career as well. And I saw a lot of progress happen when you're open to pretty much anybody's opinion and anybody's way of doing anything, because anything that anybody says can potentially help you in your career.
Yeah, like during the like a day off in like a starting pitcher role, like did you ever like learn something that like worked for you super well? Did you try something that like didn't really click for you?
Absolutely, dude. So in 2022, Jordan Lyles was in our rotation. Veteran guy, pitched in the big leagues for a long time. Awesome guy to have in the clubhouse and in the dugout. Just simple like picking guys like his brain and more so he's an old school guy, so he was a little bit more so about attacking hitters in terms of front to back. And that's kind of where I learned that more so that terminology and how it really applied was just sitting in the dugout with him over a span of the season. He helped me really understand what that terminology is and kind of just really disrupting timing front to back rather than east to west. So something as simple as that, as well as, a guy like uh, Dean Kramer, a good buddy of mine with the Orioles. He's very smart when it comes to pitch shapes and seam orientations and things like that. And talking to a guy like him and picking a brain on, what do you think of this script? What do you see here? What would you change? Or, stuff like that. There's a lot. And then obviously too, nowadays in the professional game, you have so many of these analysts and pitching coaches that are more analytic driven that have a good grasp on what these pitch shapes or the seam orientations or what maybe plays for your slot more so than another pitch or another grip. So there's so much data out there, and guys you'd be a fool to not be all ears on anybody who has any information.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up Jordan Lyles because I had a question about this because like I've always like felt like his role of like an innings eater, and I think this is something that you've talked a lot about too. Is just like you take a lot of pride in throwing a lot of innings and being that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But for a guy like Jordan Lyles, so like that was his like calling card. He's going to give you 30 starts and 180 plus every single year,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of like the outcome. Is there like a different mindset for a pitcher in that role of like being like a workhorse, especially on like on a team that's like not doing that great? Like, does a pitcher on like a pitcher like that on a team that's going to give up some runs? Like, do you have to have like a different headspace to pitch like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have to set your goals in different locations. If you set your goal to be, have a sub 3 ERA and be striking out everybody and all that type of stuff, you're going to run into a lot of struggles over the span of a season. It's hard to dominate like that unless you're a Jacob DeGrom or a Justin Verlander, those guys that have done it over years, year in, year out. You have to shift your focus more so to, all right, how much can I save our bullpen this start? How deep can I get into this game because our bullpen may be hanging from the past couple games, or how much can I keep us in the game because I know our offense is great in 7, 8, 9 innings to put up a couple runs. How can I keep this game as close as possible? You start shifting your focuses to be more team driven than individually driven, and that just comes with maturing in your acceptance of your role on the team. And I mentioned it before, the whole ego death side of things. You when you can put your personal ego away and really allow yourself to just make the best decision for a team, you're going to put yourself in a good position as in that role as a starting pitcher. Now, if you're an ace and you're going to dominate, this might be a little bit of a different perspective. But if you're that guy like a Jordan Lyles, a guy like myself, my goal was to eat innings, when you put your perspective in shifting into that, you're going to allow yourself to push through maybe a grind outing where you gave up 3 in the first inning, but you still needed to get into the seventh. Where you're focusing more on getting deep into the game rather than like, oh crap, I just gave up a bunch of runs, we're screwed. I think putting your goal in a different location helps with that shift of focus.
I guess from like a fan's perspective, like a lot of people don't understand that component of like a major league pitching staff. It's like there is a certain number of innings that have to be filled, and you're not always going to get sub-3 ERA ball out of every single one of those pitchers' innings. I think maybe it was Bronson Arroyo talked about this because I think he was a quintessential every year was 200 innings. He's like, even if he had a bad one, that he'd still be like, oh well, we'll get him next time. Just like, do you have to have an even shorter memory as a pitcher like that if you give up a bunch of runs as an innings eater to just know like what you just talked about? Like, I'm still going to be gritty. I'm still going to protect the bullpen.
100%, dude. Because I mean, it's like the terminology of the world keeps spinning, right?
Yeah.
The season continues to go on. You have to continue to eat innings because you are that person that fills that quota of the guy who is supposed to help save the bullpen each week and help eat innings and give us length. You have to be that guy every week. Like a starter who's maybe it's a young phenom guy who's struggling to get deep into games, but he's going to be lights out for the first couple innings. The team is planning for that. They know that their bullpen is going to have to be ready for that start day, and they know that they may need to have someone who can eat innings in the bullpen that day, and that they're going to be able to, and whatever they take from somewhere else, there's going to be a need there. So they're going to take from that, say a guy like Jordan Lyles, they're going to take the bullpen arm from that start and move him to this guy's start and say, hey, Jordan, we really need you to go deep because we're not going to have that safety net there for you because we got to move it to a different day, if that makes sense. So it's very planned out. It's very calculated. But as someone who you are in that role, every MLB team has roles. And if you're in that role, you have a duty and you have to provide that duty. And it's not about putting up zeros. It really isn't. It's about helping the team win for an extended period of time.
What lessons do you think coming up through the Orioles system and then making your debut in 21 when they were still kind of going through like the bad parts of the rebuild and losing 100 plus games, like what lessons did you learn about yourself as a pitcher and learn about like the big leagues as a whole when you came up on a team that was not as good as the Orioles, back then were?
Yeah, that was quite the experience. It definitely taught me how good the big leagues is. That's for sure. Especially being on a team where you're consistently getting, for lack of a better term, your ass kicked every night. Open. I would say the biggest thing that year taught me was how to really lose. You lose in the minor leagues, of course. In baseball, you'll always lose. But I was lucky enough to play on some really good minor league teams coming up through the pros and things like that. And so, and I knew how to lose. I don't want it to sound like that. I knew how to lose, but when you lose at that level and you're under such a microscope and you have to find a way to continue to push through every outing when the energy is not there from the team, everybody's already down. There's already speculation about how the day is going to go by, the reporters and the TV stations and things like that. There's so much negativity around you. Like understanding how to still push through, because as a professional, you have to show up every day. There's no just showing up and be like, I'm kind of down. Like you have to show up every day and perform. That's a part of the job. And so being on that stage and learning how to fail on that stage just set me up for not only continuing on in my career and learning how to handle failure through that way, but even into this next stage of my career, of my life, and this next chapter, learning how to fail on a huge stage and continue to push through and grow and allow that to move me forward.
Do you think clubhouse chemistry and like being friends with the guys on your team, if when the team is underperforming like that, do you think that becomes even more important, like, especially like in 21, like you just talked about? Like, did you rely on like your teammates to kind of get you through some of those bad, dark times?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's everything because those are the guys that you are with every single day. And it can go two ways. You guys can either connect as a group and it's great, and you can get through even on a bad team. You can find ways to still have fun, learn, grow, get through the time because the season's not going anywhere. They're not going to shave games off because you're not playing well and they're worried about your feelings. Like that's not going to happen. The season's going to go on. You have to get through it. And so you can there's two ways you can go about it. You can just shut down and no one talks to each other and it makes it more miserable, or you can connect with your group in the clubhouse and make it just a little bit more palatable. So yeah, I would say it's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily more important than any other time. I would say it's just as important as it would be on a good team. But it is something that it can go two ways. It can go really great or poorly depending on how you want to look at the season based off of what's being presented to you, to the team.
You were in Baltimore in such an interesting period in the team's history from like we just talked about like in 21 losing 100 plus games, but then that next year though, like
Mm-hmm.
how much of a different feel did the 22 team have versus 21, especially you personally, because I feel like you had a stretch there before the All-Star break. It was like 4-0, like a sub 2 maybe, like you were
Mm-hmm.
feeling it. So like what was the difference like in 22 that year?
Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of plays in. And now, obviously, we were winning a little bit more, but that collection of guys in 2022 was definitely a little bit more tightly knit. We had more veteran presence in the clubhouse that year that brought everybody together, which definitely helped. But would I say that team was necessarily that much better than the 2021 team? Not not really, but I will say that team playing together and that clubhouse camaraderie is what made us so much better. I wouldn't say there was that much of a difference. I mean, maybe a little bit more depth in 2022, but the clubhouse atmosphere definitely played into it. For me, it was a huge part of, feeling accepted in the clubhouse as a rookie. That was a big thing. Felt like my team, wanted me to take the ball every fifth day and be on the mound. So that was a big part of it. And that definitely played into my success alongside just learning with the group that we had. So yeah, to answer your question, the clubhouse side, like I mentioned before, I would say it's no more important one scenario than the other. I think it's probably one of the most important things that you can have on a team.
As a pitcher working with obviously the Orioles catching core back then in 22, I wanted to ask about the Adley Rutschman effect because before he got there, it was 16 and 55. And then after he got called up, they finished 67 and 54 with Adley there. What was that like seeing? Because I think you were there before he and after, obviously, but like when he got there, like what did you notice about like him working with him as a catcher and just like everything that he brought to the squad
Mm-hmm.
back then?
Yeah, Adley's a phenomenal baseball player and a phenomenal dude. I think his ability to just engage with the pitchers, he's not going to come in and bark orders and say we need to do this and that or whatnot. He's going to learn you. He's going to take his time to understand you as a pitcher, and he's going to figure out how like what makes you tick. And so he would engage himself, not necessarily like I said about the guy coming in to bark orders, but he would figure out what works for you. He'd give you feedback, and then he'd work together with you based off of just his perception. So it was never a my way or the highway feel with Adley. And not saying that's a normal thing, but there are guys that can come in and it kind of becomes like is this what you want or is this what's going to be better for me? Adley came in and was very much he's a quiet leader. So he didn't come in and was like, hey, barking orders. Like I said, he just came in and took his time, learned the pitchers, and then grew with the pitchers, if that makes sense. So he was a guy that when I threw in 2022, I felt when I had that really good stretch was because I felt like he started, like we were on the same page. I felt like I never had to shake the guy off. He just understood what made my stuff play really well, and I trusted him on that. And so I think he does a really good job of building the trust with the pitchers.
Did you also kind of feed off of his like personality and like how common is it? Because I feel like that's when he started doing like, and Felix would get the save, he'd give him a hug. And I just feel like he was just so in it. And like you could tell that like
Mm-hmm.
he really cared about every single one of his guys. Like, did you kind of feed off of that?
Yeah, you can tell he loves to be there. He loves to show up to the field every day. He enjoys his teammates, and not just when things are going good, when things are going bad for him too. Like that's the other thing that makes him such a great catcher is he may have a shit day at the plate, but he's going to still approach you just as you would any other game in between innings to talk about the next set of guys in the lineup, like things like that. So Yeah, I think you definitely feed off a guy like that who is the same guy that shows up to the field every day, wants to be there, wants to work, wants to see you succeed and see you get better, see the team succeed. He's an all around good team guy. Not to mention he's a phenomenal baseball player. Yeah, really enjoyed throwing to Adley as well as being a teammate with him.
One thing I've always wanted to know is just like we talk about, just like the 22 team. Like I thought they had a legit chance because the month of July there, like they had such a tremendous month, and then they decided to peel off a couple guys at the trade deadline. As
Mm-hmm.
somebody who was on that team, was that kind of deflating when they started trading guys like Trey and the All Star closer Jorge Lopez away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it it was a little bit disheartening for the guys, I think. You see, especially the guys that were there the year prior, the guys that are seeing the success we're having on the field, the group together, it's very close, a lot of fun in the clubhouse celebrating wins, off days celebrating together, things like that. And then you start to see that happen. You start to get a feel of like, okay, well, does the front office see the same thing going on? Are they really wanting to invest into this year and what we're accomplishing, or are they more so continuing to just look for towards the next year, the next 2 years, by getting younger prospects in return? So there was a little bit of frustration there for sure from the group. It is a business. It is what it is, and like I said, the world continues, the season continues. You have to show up and you have to play regardless. But yeah, it was a little bit more of a bummer to see guys like Trey and Jorge, leave the team. Guys that were veterans for us and that were a big part of our clubhouse, a big part of our success on the field. But like I said, it's a business. It is what it is, and the season continues.
I always wonder, like, especially when guys play for like the Rays, and like obviously that's like the extreme example of a team that like they'll trade anybody. Like it's so hard to
Mm-hmm.
buy like a Rays jersey if you're a fan because the guy will be gone soon. But like if you're a play, it's you have to get the blank ones. I think
Yeah, yeah.
if you're a guy on a team like that, and you, like you just said, the Orioles, they were thinking years in advance, like super front office savvy stuff. Did that ever pique your interest to like want to learn more about like that side of the house, like why they think the way they do and player development and stuff?
Yeah, I mean that was always, you'd hear the term guys would say don't play GM while you'd be playing because you'd be wondering, why'd they make this move? Why'd this guy get released? Why'd this guy get promoted? Oh, why'd this guy get DFA'd? All this type of stuff. There's when you're playing, there's so much that goes into it that you don't realize. And now being on the other side of the game, kind of in discussing with the directors of player development and talking with GMs, and things like that, and being on some of these phone calls, there's so much more going on in the scheme of it. I mean, they may be making this decision, but they're looking how it affects 10 decisions down the line. And it's pretty interesting, and it's very, very calculated. And there's a lot of, these trees of like, here's the player in this tree, this is the result if we make this decision, and this is the result if we make this decision. It's a very calculated thing. Sometimes, now ultimately, sometimes decisions happen because their hands are tied and they have to make a decision, and it's not a great one. But for the most part, teams are very, very calculated when it comes down to the decision making process.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to like wrap things up and just like talk about like your current role now at Gaeta Sports Management. Like, what was the backstory from going from like player? I know you played overseas for a little bit to finish out your
Mm-hmm.
playing career, but like, what was the story from going from player to on the agency side?
Yeah, it was definitely a transition I was a little bit nervous about. I mean, it is very similar. Obviously, we're still in the game, but it's a complete, 180 shift of being on the other side of the fence. Um, but honestly, the transition couldn't have been smoother. I've really enjoyed this opportunity that Matt Gaeta, the head of the agency, has given me to step in and be an agent within the company. But just to it basically echoes what I was able to do in the later years of my career as a veteran presence in the clubhouse, and bringing guys under the wing or offering a resource like we were mentioning earlier about the player development side of my title. Being a resource for our clients as someone who's been in their shoes and knows what they're going through. Maybe it's a pitcher who hasn't been able to keep a guy off base for 2 weeks. Been there. I know exactly what you're going through. Or maybe it's a hitter who cannot get a hit. Well, as someone who's gone through slumps myself on the pitching side, or just experienced, know what guys have gone through in the past, like I can be a sounding board for them. So that transition's been super easy. And then on top of that, now it's just getting a feel for the conversations with the front offices. As we worked, as I'm still on the newer side, so as I'm working to go through the certification process, shadowing Matt and listening to all the phone calls and how he negotiates contracts and things like that, as well as diving into the international side and working with teams for Mexico contracts and overseas contracts and things like that. It's been a really smooth transition from being, like I said, being on the inside of the lines, and now we're on the other side of the fence. Just learning the whole aspect of the business side, the connections, the phone calls, all that type of stuff, as well as being the resource for the players. Like I mentioned earlier, just here in a little bit, we're going to head over to a spring training game to see one of our guys. So little things here, the non-glorious things have been a big part of it too. So, but just really enjoying the transition.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, obviously, like you said, like you have so much experience and you're such a great resource for guys like that coming up and going through everything. So, I guess my last question would be is like, I feel like because this has been another thing that I've talked to a lot of guys about. It's just like the way that veteran players have been kind of looked at in recent years from a team's perspective. How have you kind of seen the way teams view veteran guys in terms of like getting opportunities? Obviously, this is something that you went through not that long ago. But I feel like it's a lot different now. And I think it's very interesting the way they're kind of getting not as much love.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as the game continues to shrink, it continues to get younger, and especially with this new CBA coming up, they're talking about shrinking the game even more, which only again brings the game down more and more. So it is unfortunate. The veteran aspect of the game is getting pushed out a little bit earlier than in years past. And I think there's a lot of value to guys like myself when I was playing and other guys in the system now that are starting to get into the year 30, 31, 32, guys even above that. Bring so much value to the upper levels of the minor league system if they're not a big league caliber player anymore. Um, these you see it now. The game is as talented as ever, but the polish is gone. You don't see the polish consistently. You see guys learning how to polish their game in the big leagues at the big league level, making weird mistakes, things like that. You could completely eradicate that from the game by keeping a more veteran presence in AAA and AA, allowing these younger guys to learn under these guys who have done it in their shoes for longer than they've probably been playing the game professionally. But I think there's so much value that goes into that, and not to mention that those veteran guys drive the clubhouse atmosphere. And like I mentioned with the 2022 Orioles, our veterans in that clubhouse were what drove our energy, what drove the team to win. That there's so much value in that, and I get it. The business side, return on investment. I understand. The younger guys, they're gonna have more money put into them. They're gonna want to get money back from that investment sooner. So I get that aspect of the game. But just from someone, a true baseball lover, I would love to see, more of a veteran presence at the upper levels just to polish the game up a little bit more as these guys jump into the next step as they get into the big leagues.
Yeah, that's why I think it was so cool, like what you're able to do in Rochester a few years ago, because obviously the Nats are one of those younger teams. Like
Mm-hmm.
having a guy like yourself who had major league experience, and I think there was a couple other like veteran type leaders on that team. It's like, yeah, it just sucks because like the opportunities I feel like are less and less for those kind of guys, and now some of them are going overseas. Like my buddy's playing down in Mexico, which I think
Mm-hmm.
that league has
Yep.
gotten a lot better. So it just sucks that they have to go overseas to go and play independent ball to keep finding work. Whereas I think a great over 30 veteran type leader would thrive at a AAA setting.
Certainly, absolutely, and you're going to see the trickle down effect, like you mentioned, like your buddies over in Mexico. We have a handful of clients that easily could pitch at the big league level right now, but they're considered, there's a red X there because of their age, and they're being pushed into Mexico. The guys are being pushed over into Taiwan, Korea, Japan. You're going to see that trickle down effect, and those leagues are going to get better and better too. But yeah, I agree, man. I think a veteran presence at the minor league level is something that gets overlooked, and that these teams should start putting a little bit more effort into, or being a little bit more understanding of hanging on to a veteran presence. Especially too, because the coaching staffs are getting younger and younger because they're so data driven. You don't have that old wiry coach that's been in pro ball for 67 years. I used to have a coach, his name was Ace Adams. Every day he'd come in and he'd tell us he would say, "I've spilt more beer than you've drank." That was like the first thing that he would say every time he'd come in, because he was like 70 years old. Like he coached like Tom Seaver, like crazy dude, but awesome baseball guy to have around. And like so many like funny sayings and just stories that I've heard are come from this guy Ace Adams. He was one of our short season coaches, and but those guys don't exist anymore. So you don't have that veteran presence. So like I think investing in keeping an actual player around kind of fills that gap, fills that void.
There should always be a place for baseball lifers. I've always, yeah, it's just
100%,
you learn so
100%, man.
much. Yeah.
There's some organizations that still keep those guys around. That there's a handful of they keep a handful of guys on coaching staffs that maybe they're more so a coordinator role in season, or maybe they're just around in spring training, but they're walking around and you can tell who they are. They got a baseball bat that's turned into a cane. What guys I'm talking about. But they're just there to kind of, either, talk a little bit of trash to guys, or just, be a resource, or just hang out and be there, be, an energy guy. So, there are organizations that keep it around, but I would like to see a little bit more veteran presence on the playing side stuck around for some of these guys to use as they develop.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm sure you guys would be fighting for that, at the agency side now. But
Sure.
yeah, man, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to talk ball. Learned so much and really appreciated it. So best of luck with the agency side work you're doing at Gaeta now, and hopefully we'll catch up again here down the line.
Yeah, brother. Appreciate you, man. I appreciate you always shedding a light on the game and the ins and outs of it. So excited to have an opportunity here. But yeah, let's stay in touch, man. Appreciate you taking the time.